Podcasters Roundtable, round 78, turning listeners into subscribers. Maybe it's officially titled Moving Listeners to Subscribers. Same concept. And I mean, a lot of you listening or watching, that's you right now. You're just listening, whether it's on the website or maybe you're watching on YouTube. So I guess like the best thing to do would be tell you right now, subscribe, right? If you're on YouTube, subscribe, which is not always the best system because YouTube, I just don't think people consume YouTube the same as they do. I talk a little bit about that. And so it's different when you have a YouTube subscriber versus a podcast subscriber. If you are listening on an app, you're probably already subscribed. We'll get into that a little bit because apps, I think, tend to work that way. If you're on the website, there are buttons to subscribe. But now I've front-loaded the content here with like calls to action. Is that really the right thing to do? So we're going to find out about that as well. And all that stuff I just said, help me remind me of that, co-host, because we'll have to bring it back up, and I don't think I have that in my notes. But let's meet the roundtable. Let's meet what we're starting with, which is no guests because they're trying to get back into this roundtable. Technical issues, but we're live, and we're just going to go with it. Daniel, welcome back.
Thank you very much. Becoming a subscriber is key to in podcasting, and especially those casual things. We do all of this promotion to, hey, come listen to this episode, whether it's posting a link to the MP3 directly or it's a video on YouTube, a live event, posting the page with our show notes on it and the player on it. But I think we often forget as podcasters that not everyone is actually subscribed, and we might be attracting a lot of casual viewers. So I'm eager for this conversation.
Yeah, I'm also curious on the other side of that, of constantly putting that call to action in front of people who are already subscribed. Such a large segment of your audience is subscribed. They don't want to hear it all the time, but something to think about. Dave, welcome back.
Yeah, Dave Jackson from the School of Podcasting. And, just think of it this way. If we go back to the days of magazines, you used to go down to the magazine stand and see what was new. And if you really liked it, you would then subscribe to that magazine and have it come to your mailbox. And that's basically the same thing. When somebody finds something that they really like, they don't have to keep going back to iTunes to see if there's a new episode, and they subscribe and it just goes to their phone. So,
by the way, now that I've given you a few minutes to subscribe to the show, when you check out, well, in this case on YouTube, it'll say Ray Ortega. Now you have a little bell and it's a little notification icon. You want to click that and you want to select all notifications. So now we've made the process of subscribing pretty complex, right? And that's probably something else we should talk about, like the difficulty of getting someone to subscribe or knowing how to subscribe and what we should do about that for our shows. Now, we will have a couple more roundtablers, but we'll work them in as we go. I did this on Twitter, I think yesterday, and Anchor, and it's a little fun game. We'll play this here.
Anchor? Who's on Anchor anymore?
Yeah, well, not many people apparently because I got one response. But I think that has to do more with consistency than it does an abandoned platform. But who knows? Anchor, talk about time stamping this in history. People will listen back and be like, why did he have an anchor on his show? Was that in the background? Anyways,
I'm big on blab.
Big on blab. Yes, we were. Let me ask you. You get one call to action on your podcast. It's all your allowed. What is it? You have to think about it. Is interesting enough.
For me, I think if I had only one call to action that I could ask people to do, that would be subscribe to my email list, because from there I can deliver the other specific calls to action that are actually more actionable than hearing it in a podcast.
Yeah, that was my suspicion, although, it makes me think, is that just something we've learned? Because I think it is, because I'll tell you what the responses were to that on Twitter and Anchor. There was one. And actually, anyways, Dave, you get one call to action in your show.
That's a tough one because, the podcast can drive people to sign up for the newsletter, and the newsletter you can drive people to sign up for the podcast. So the question was, which one gets opened up more? That's where So I think I'm going to go with Daniel and say because an email also is one click away from an affiliate link from anything. It's one click away. With a subscribe, they're listening to it while they're at, the grocery store or whatever. You got to get them back to their computer, or you hope they know how to get the show notes on the app, things like that. So I think I'm going with email. So
all right. Well, we can put this to the ultimate test. We can ask Paul Colligan, who I think is probably a master at this kind of thing. So, Paul Colligan, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I just jumped on. What's the question?
So I asked this on Twitter the other day. I said, you get one call to action in your podcast. That's it. What would yours be?
Email.
That's a common. So I wonder if it's more common amongst us who are sort of in the space of telling other people, hey, here's some tips about how to maybe get the best conversion on your call to action, because the overwhelming response on Twitter, but they all said the same thing, was that they would tell somebody else to tell a friend or someone else, tell somebody about the show. And that no one said email. And I thought that's actually what might come up. So what do you think it is? Do you think we are self-selecting audience in that we are marketers or promoters or podcasters about podcasting who are going to say, use your email list? Is it the best advice, or do they have it right? Should you just tell your people to tell someone else?
Well, the thing is, telling somebody to tell someone else is brilliant. The thing is, if you've got a show, you only get a chance to do that once. If you got an email address, you can do that until they tell you to stop emailing them. So I think it's not a question of what you tell them to do. It's just the order whereby which you do it. Does that make sense?
Yeah. What do you guys think?
The fun thing is I can tell them to, if they don't understand the directions, if I say, oh, it's easy, just subscribe in iTunes, and they go, okay. If they don't know what that means, but they don't want to say, well, how do you do that? Or,
And even that, that phrase right there, it's so ingrained into us to say iTunes, but people with their mobile device look at iTunes. It's not the podcast app. So really we need to be even more universal than that to say subscribe. But if you start trying to tell them how to subscribe, then you're giving them more information than it's necessary. And then you're filtering it to only one platform. Like, what about the Android users? What about the desktop listeners? What about the person who's listening through their browser?
Hey, guys.
Yep. Hey, what's up,
Glenn
Glenn?
Here. Can I jump in?
Yes, you can.
So if you have to introduce yourself first, we got Glenn. He's audio only, but most of you are hearing this. Most listens are coming audio only.
Nobody wants to see me anyway, so that's okay.
We do, but it's all right.
Glenn the Geek, founder and host of several of the shows on the Horse Radio Network. Sorry about that. Was having technical issues. If I had to pick one, mine's a little different. We have our own app, and we are doing very well with people listening on our app. Now, I have all horse people who are a little more technically challenged than most, and always have been since we started 9 years ago. So our call to action is usually at the end. If we do one, we'll send them to our app.
Cool. Go ahead.
That's a good call to action because of that reason that you're saying. And that's something that, as each of us have a podcast about podcasting, with the exception of Glenn, but so our audience knows how to subscribe. I almost even wonder, is it really necessary for me to ask the listeners of the Audacity to Podcast to subscribe? Because they know how to subscribe. They know the benefits of subscribing. They're podcasters, or they're wannabe podcasters, so they know about that. But for the non-geeky people, you tell them to subscribe and they think, okay, great. How? What do I do? I don't, what is this even? I like the app idea.
Well, that's why we did it, is because it was too hard to explain to people who really don't get iTunes. They didn't understand podcasts. We started 2008. It's still our biggest challenge in the horse world is the technology. And I think we've always said horse people are 1 to 2 years behind technology. And it's always been that way since the 90s when I've been dealing with horse people. So that's why we spent the money to do our own app. Plus, I always figured if they're listening in our app, they're in our walled garden. So they're not going listen to other shows. They're going to look around our 10 shows and they're going to find something else within our app to listen to. And the other reason I don't send them to our email list is we really suck at sending out emails. So.
That is a problem. That is a
Yeah,
problem.
if you
I'm
can't
on
be
that
there,
boat.
if you can't be there, well, don't tell them to go
Don't
there
do
where
it.
you went.
Yeah. So it's brought up, I've kind of moved us past actually even the initial question is moving listeners to subscribers. So we are actually talking about a call to action to someone who is listening. So part of the trick is just getting someone to listen to your show, the people who want to hear your show, right? Getting in front of those people. What are, you publish a podcast, you put it on wherever you want. Each you could send it there probably via email on his phone, wherever you're watching. Where are you getting people? What are you doing besides publishing a podcast to get someone to listen to that show? I guess that's a long way of saying how are you marketing your podcast? How are you getting listeners beyond just being available on iTunes? What's your number one way of getting listeners?
I email them. So there's the prejudice to that, but every time we email, we get a lot more listeners than if we don't. I mean, subscribe is a nice concept. And I think what Daniel said is true about, we're kind of in this space. We like it a lot more, but, I've got a client that I'm working with right now, really big name, big list. Every time he emails about a show, we get about 20,000 listens. Every time he does an email about a show, we get about 8,000 listens.
And that's kind of where this whole thing was born out of, because I'm doing some stuff on social where I've been able to increase the listenership of one show in theory by 1,000%, whatever it is. Significant increase by putting it on Facebook. But with recent technology, or at least with Facebook getting rid of Flash and the Flash player, now you have to upload through, if you're on Libsyn, you can upload to there, get a video player. It'll give you these insights, and it'll show you that people are clicking, says they're listening, they are not listening, at least in our case. And I'm talking about going out to a massive group of people. So, when if we don't publish to Facebook, our numbers don't look as good, but I still don't know that it doesn't look like those people are actually listening. So, Paul, with the email, are you getting downloads, or is it, are they clicking through to a website to play? How is that working?
New episode, we send them right to iTunes. Yes, we love Android users. Yes, we love everybody, but it's all about the numbers. And we send them to iTunes, and of course, we don't know who clicks subscribe and who doesn't, but they're getting the downloads. On the Facebook thing, can I give you a stat that'll terrify you a little bit?
Yes.
Facebook, a view, 3 seconds. That's all they count for a view.
Right.
Which is about all you need for a scroll by. So a lot of your views on Facebook are scroll bys. And when you look at the stats for videos, it'll tell you how long they stay. And it's not that much at all, especially for audio with regular, just static embed on it. Once you start getting a talking head, a pretty one, people will stay and go from there.
I've seen the same thing on YouTube. I've done some experiments in the past where a video version, or not video version, but a fake video version of a podcast episode, several episodes like this were published on YouTube, got tens of thousands of quote views, but the drop-off rate was horrible. Like 95.
What is that? Is that an audio with just an image? Is that what you call it?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm calling that a fake video. Drop-off rate, 95% within the first, I think, 90 seconds. 95% of them were gone. Another 2.5% were gone within 5 minutes or so. Now, this is one case, and results vary, and especially if you can have a talking head. One of the things that I think would be a solution in this space is the ideal, the perfect thing, I think, for this would be if we could tell people to go to a subscribe page, like we say, subscribe to the podcast at myawesomepodcast.com/subscribe. They go there, and the page is intelligent enough to detect what kind of device they're using and give them the most prominent option for that device. So if they're on Apple, it gives them the podcast app link. If they're on Android, it gives them either Google Play or the subscribe on Android link.
We're doing actually we've got a client that we're doing some Facebook ads on, and we're only advertising to iPhone users. And we're only advertising to iPhone users 6 or higher. So it's the higher end iPhone user. And then we're sending them right to the podcast app.
Nice.
And so Android types aren't getting it. All 7 of the Windows Phone users aren't getting it. It's only the iPhone types that are getting it.
Adam Weddle, I hope I'm saying that right, in the chat says it's a hot topic on YouTube. About 6 to 10 months ago, several vloggers have posted videos on this. I don't know if he means retention or just getting viewers to turn into subscribers. Now, I see this on my YouTube. My YouTube does fairly well, but it lives on search and suggested. It doesn't live. If you look at my subscriber numbers, you're like, wow, that's amazing. Well, look at 30,000 subscribers doesn't mean anything. Doesn't mean that a video that I publish is going to get 30,000 views at all. My channel is fueled by search, as opposed to a vlogger who does get someone who comes back every day. Those are subscribers. It's different. And I think the numbers on YouTube are, for that reason, I feel like they're different than podcasts. I mean, if I have 2,000 subscribers, if I can establish that on my podcast, I'm pretty confident that when I put out a podcast, it's going to get those 2,000 listens, in theory. Now, this probably has more to do with the way that people get podcasts, in terms of if you're subscribed in an app, there are numbers out there. Dave, do we have the numbers where pretty much most of the consumption, the app is going to pull down that within the first, most of your downloads are going to come in the first 72 hours or something like that, right? And that's really the app's just grabbing. Whether someone listened to it is a whole different story.
Right.
Edison reported that most people listen to a podcast. The way that they defined it is very questionable and somewhat controversial, but essentially what they found is that most people listen to a podcast within 24 to 48 hours of interacting with it, whether that be downloading it or its release.
Which makes sense because most of them are going to their device and doing a stream. So that makes total sense.
So when it comes to, do you care, Paul? So if you don't publish that email, I mean, you're not going to get the stats, at least, whether you get the listens or not. You're not going to get the same reach that you would if you don't publish the email. Do you care about moving those people to subscribers, or is it fine that you have to publish a podcast and send out an email? You don't care as long as they listen.
Well, it depends what the end game is. It depends what the goal is. If my goal is to have a loyal podcast audience, then I'd be really upset if they're not moving to subscriptions. If my goal is to get my show listened to as many people as possible, I need to not care how it is that they listen, how it is that they consume. So
I think there was also more recent reports about how podcasts are still a subscriber-driven medium, right? Yeah. So, I mean, is this something that should we be more interested in figuring out how to take listens to subscribers?
Well, the thing I want to hear Paul elaborate on is everybody was talking about ratings and reviews, and Paul has figured out that really to get somebody up the charts of iTunes was through subscribing. Can you elaborate? I know you mentioned that on the podcast report.
It's now the podcast industry report, by the way.
Thank you.
Helps with SEO.
Who makes their name longer?
Yeah, anyway.
a little trick I learned from one of you here. Apparently SEO and iTunes is important. Let me first hit the first question, because here's an interesting one for you. My mom to this day believes that she can't listen to my stuff because she doesn't have an Apple. And I keep telling her, I'll buy you one, but she's happy with her Kindle Fire. And so about 6 months ago, I come home, or I come to visit her, and she's got the iHeartRadio app on her Kindle. And I say, hey, Mom, iHeartRadio, why do you have that? She has 3 apps. Why iHeartRadio? And she said, well, the radio told me to. Okay. And I said, well, Mom, I'm on iHeartRadio. Thank you, Dave Jackson. And she goes, when did you get on the radio? I'm like, Mom, no, it's a podcast. It's on iHeartRadio. No, this is iHeartRadio. This is just radio stations. I'm like, okay, Mom.
Welcome to my world.
It goes back to it goes back to how they consume it. Do I care? I still love the word podcast, but do I care how they listen? No. Now, Dave, your question. Here's the deal. Every time we get a lot of people to click subscribe over the course of 24 hours, we chart like crazy. And I've taken to number 1 in their category. Most of them have gone to number 1 in their subcategory. and all of them have top 50 or better inside of iTunes, all based on getting people to click subscribe over the course of a 24-hour time period.
And clarification here for Paul's benefit, he is talking about actual number one, not this mythical number one in new, but he's talking about the actual top 10 podcast thing. Yeah.
Actual number. It's funny, actually, a guy that we ran. We'll hit that one later. But so they get to number one by subscribe links, and it's funny because I had one client who the entire message was subscribe. That was the only message. iTunes was the only link. The entire message was subscribe, not consume, not listen, not sign up for my email list, not anything. The message was subscribe. Person made it number 3 in all of iTunes. Okay. Had someone else who the message was listen to my podcast on iTunes, not subscribe, did 4 times as many downloads as my person made it number 3 in all of iTunes did, only made it number 57 in all of iTunes. And it's because the message wasn't subscribe, the message was consume. So subscribe in iTunes does you really, really well in the iTunes charts. If you have a show where that makes sense and that's helpful, that's fantastic. It's certainly bragging, and it's the type of thing that consultants love to do. But Dave, does that answer your question?
Yeah, it goes back to just the whole question of why would we want to do this? Why do we care about subscribers? And that's obviously a reason right there.
We want consumption. We want consumption. We want impact.
And Harry wants to know in the chat room, how long did they last at number 1 once they got there?
What's funny is they last about 4 or 5 days based on how big their email list is. But then what happens is every time we send an email, they shoot back up into the top 10.
Interesting.
And so there's some so every time they shoot an email, top 10. Every time they don't shoot an email, we don't make top 10.
So Glenn, you have alluded to the fact that your audience is a little behind when it comes to tech. And do you need to send out emails and social and everything else that's not a podcast in order to get your listens? Or have you, first of all, where are most of your listens coming from? I guess you said the app, but
from not from iTunes. I can tell you that. We get most of our listeners from our own app and, Android podcast players on the Android side. Now, the other thing that we have that a lot of people don't, because we've been doing this so long, is we have about 35 websites in the horse world, magazines, blogs, and things like that have our players. We provide players for them to put on their website. So listeners can actually listen on their websites. It opens a pop-up window. They can still scroll around the magazine's website and listen to our shows. And we have about 35 of those. Only about 5% of our traffic comes from those players. So what I think, what we hope happens is that those 5%, a certain percentage of those become subscribers at some point. That's what we hope happens. Now we have about 160 Patreons. We call them auditors. They're like our focus group, and I can ask them questions anytime in their private Facebook page. And what we've discovered doing surveys with them, so these are our super listeners, is that they listen in our app unless they also listen to other podcasts. The ones who listen to other podcasts then use a podcast player. So it's been interesting to have that focus group to really dig down, and 160 is a pretty good group to dig down with. So, but that's what we found, is if they're not listening to anything but Horse Radio Network, then they're listening in our app. If they're listening to other podcasts, then they're doing it in another player. I always viewed our Facebook posts not really as marketing, but as a reminder that the show's out to our current subscribers.
Well, and the other thing that Glenn does that I think is awesome, if you go to his website at horseradionetwork.com, he has the big slider at the top, and then the very next thing is how to listen. And he has a picture there for iPhone app, one for computer, one for iTunes, one for podcatchers. And if you click on the one for iTunes, he gives you step-by-step, including screenshots of how, what does that mean? And so he literally is holding his potential subscriber's hand and just walking them through the process.
Which I find interesting, because Jason Olivio in the chat says he thinks another important question is, do certain podcast formats lend themselves towards certain calls to action? In other words, should I do a mailing list as a 2-hour show versus, say, 15 to 30 minute show? and it actually made me think too, what Daniel's saying, him actually even questioning, should he even say subscribe to an audience of the Audacity to Podcast, the Podcaster Studio? Do I really need to ask people to tell them to subscribe? They are podcasters, right? They pretty much get that. So, it just brings in an interesting
If they
question.
don't, maybe they should find a different profession, hobby.
Like how much do we? So you seem that you need to really teach your audience how to subscribe, whereas I think that Daniel's audience not so much. But have you found that having that extreme sort of walk through, this sort of hold your hand through the process, is that the key to getting people who would just listen, like it, and then subscribe?
I get a lot less emails and questions about how to subscribe now since we have that on the page, and we have it so prominently. We just did a website redesign, and on the last one, it wasn't as prominent. And now we have seen our number of emails go down asking us, okay, how do I do this? How do I listen? And of course, we're all getting less of the what station are you on, but I still get that. I still do get that, but less of it now that we have that.
Have you thought about making a URL that sounds like a radio station? Just tell them to go to WKPIX.com.
Well, when it's Horse Radio. It's Horse Radio Network, and most of our shows have radio in it. But that's partly because we did start in 2008, and nobody knew what podcasts were, especially my audience. They had a clue. I'd make them sound like Luddites, but they've really caught up. I mean, they really have. I mean, most of them have smartphones now. But we were out in Colorado driving around. I saw these horse farms in an area where we had no cell phone reception, and they certainly don't have any internet. So we still have to worry about our size of our files too, because they're downloading a lot of them on dial-ups, or they're doing it on their phones, through a dial-up wireless. So we have that issue too, because they're rural.
I was going to ask, what's the biggest challenge in reaching your potential audience? So we've got subscribers, we've got people who found us, maybe searched, and they're checking us out, and we want to convert them to subscribers, or do we?
You guys, I'm always jealous of you guys because you're dealing with tech-savvy people who usually live in a town that they can get at least cable or some kind of internet. Most of mine are on DSL, or some of them, if they're really rural, are on dial-up because they're on farms.
Well, this explains why we don't have any video of you.
Yeah, well, apparently, yeah.
Crowd.
I don't know why. I've tried 2 computers and still can't get video, so there you go.
It's all right. The internet wants you to stay audio. It's obvious. But so you can do that. You have a better opportunity with audio because of the lower bandwidth required, and the smaller file size. But so what is your biggest challenge in reaching your potential audience? Not the people you have reached. How are you trying to reach new listeners?
We do that through our relationships with magazines, TV stations. We have a lot of relationships with the magazine, especially magazines now, that are coming on board and even doing shows with us. And part of, if they come on our show and do updates, which we have a lot of them that do updates on our different shows weekly, part of the requirement is they do have to post on their social media about being on the show. And we pick up new listeners that way. So, and they'll have following of anywhere from 100,000 to 500,000. And even if you have crappy results and crappy return on your social media investment, when you have 500,000, you're getting some on all of them.
Yeah.
Now, are your magazine ads pointing people to subscribe to the podcast, to download the app, to visit the website? What's it doing?
We're pointing them to that episode on the website.
Okay.
That's what we're pointing them to, is that episode on the website.
Is a listener, this is sort of a tree falling in the forest making a noise type of question, but is a podcast listener that doesn't come through traditional podcast means any less of a listener?
No.
This is the thing.
I don't care how they listen.
That's my question.
There are some who do.
That's my question. Is
some who do, and I think this is part of our industry's problem right now, because if they listen, we win.
Yeah.
And there's all this debate about what's the best way to listen. It's like, what's the best way to drink water? Let's get everybody listening. And let's make it as easy as possible for them to listen.
But I'm curious, does subscribing imply more? Does it imply I want to be here? Like, I want to be here every week. Whereas the listener who gets an email is like, yeah, if I don't get that email next week, not a big deal. It's not the same person who's going to write into you when you miss a week and say, "Where the hell are you?" That's not that person. So I am curious. Does it matter?
Let's quick round robin here. How many podcasts are each one of us subscribed to, and how many of them have we listened to in the last week? Like, subscription doesn't indicate anything other than an intelligent interest.
It will get delivered, right, without me doing anything. So will an email, but that also requires more work on the producer side.
How many podcasts, Dave? How many podcasts right now do you have that you've subscribed to that aren't downloading anymore because you haven't listened in long enough?
I use Overcast, so it doesn't use that feature anymore. But I had a few for a while.
Yeah.
Because as I look at this right now, I have 114 episodes that I need to listen to.
Right.
And that's because
it's not gonna happen this week.
Yeah, that's not happening this week.
I'd much rather have. Of course, I'm stating the obvious. I'd much rather have a play than be in Dave's queue.
Right.
That also said, though, Dave's not subscribed to 114 email lists, right? I mean, those shows have more opportunity to potentially get in front of Dave because he did subscribe.
I always thought that was the goal. I'm actually kind of surprised we're having this conversation. I always thought it was the goal to get him.
That's the way it's questioned.
Okay.
Does it need to be the goal? I'm just curious.
Well, again, I don't care how they listen, but I always thought the goal was to get them to subscribe because I would have a better chance of them listening if it's automatically coming in.
But it does do that.
But you're right. I have 12 podcasts on here, and I probably listen to 4 of them regularly.
Right. It's the goal because it's what we've always said over the years.
Yeah.
Right.
Right. And we've said it. Yeah, exactly. And is it the goal? I'll tell you this. I would rather have any day I'd rather have 500 email subscribers to 5,000 podcast subscribers.
Daniel's giving someone an extra download right now. That's the sound you're hearing. Daniel's out. So why, Paul?
Because the email chance, I've got a better chance of delivery at some point. The second Dave clicks subscribe in Overcast, the relationship's over until Dave decides to listen to my show. The second Dave gives me his email address, I got a new chance of relationship every time I send him an email.
Yeah, and people they check their email every day.
Yeah, and we're nerds, so we might check our podcast every day, but people check their email every day.
But they do. I think people do a lot more filtering on their email than they do on their podcast, because that's why we see open rates where we say, oh, if you got higher than, 25%, then you're doing great. And to think, oh, 25%, if only 25% of my audience was actually listening to my episodes, I'd feel like I was doing something really wrong.
Well, now we're back to this idea of how big your audience is, and I question those numbers as well. Random IP addresses that change all the time that download, getting an audience size. And I know you've got some special Apple love there, Daniel, that is a little bit exciting. But the thing is, yes, 25%, but it's 25% of every mailing. So if I mail you 4 times a month, I've got a 100% chance of you consuming, and if I do,
odds don't work that way.
It's correct, but I could also do a remailing to people who didn't open.
Yeah.
And there's just a ton of stuff I could do in email that I can't do by podcast. And the other thing is podcast, for most of us, unless we're mignon, podcasting is a commitment. If I want you to listen to my show, you and I are going to spend the next 20 minutes together. If I want you to read my email, you and I are going to spend the next 10 seconds together. And so it's an entirely different relationship, in my opinion, of course.
Is a subscriber a different type of person than a listener?
No, I think a listener's a listener. I think a listener's a listener. How they listen to you doesn't matter as long as they do. And it's a different strokes for different folks. You might be one of those 7 Windows Phone people. So you got to be on TuneIn.
Rob Greenlee.
Shout out to Rob. And so, you might have to be on TuneIn for that. And definitely be on TuneIn. But TuneIn once, set it, forget it, you're good to go. How do you get as many people to listen to your content as is humanly possible? And if subscription's the model, great. But this idea that the subscriber is the golden egg, I've got to question it, and especially universally.
So maybe it should be moving subscribers to listeners.
You know,
Because what we really want is people to listen.
Can I jump in here quick? That's why I also like sending them to our own app, is because they have to hit play for that to count. On our app, unless they hit the play button, it's, I'm not getting any false numbers. It is coming in. They either have to download it or stream it. Either way, it's hitting our sound file and that's getting counted. So I'm not getting downloads from other podcast players. I get better numbers off our own app than I do anything.
That actually, and so this is a question for Paul. Maybe you have some inside info on this one, or just knowledge. With Facebook, I would say the same thing, except that I can see in recent postings on Facebook with this whole video thing and insights and how long people listen, much like you get on Stitcher, that a lot of people on Facebook are clicking play, or they are unmuting it so it counts as a play, but they're not listening. And so the stats seem great, but they're not listening to the episode. They are liking, they are sharing, they are starting it, but they're not staying there. So I don't know really what's going on, and I think I make some correlation between Bitly and Site Manager on iTunes that, if I can get 3,000 people to listen, but 5 people subscribe, I'm actually happy with that. 5 subscribers is amazing. But Paul, does it count? Does it have to click play or unmute, or is it simply if I just stop scrolling and it plays for more than 3 seconds, even on mute, is that going to count?
I'm not totally sure there.
Yeah.
However, let me give you one fun stat. I did a blog post one time for Social Media Examiner. Okay. The title was basically, here's a cool video about social media that you should watch. The text was basically, here's a cool video about social media that you should watch. And then was a YouTube video. And then there were all the share buttons. Okay. That article was shared, not viewed, not whatnot. It was shared on Twitter 3,000 times. Okay. I only got 1,500 views on YouTube. Okay. So if every single person who viewed it shared it on Twitter, only half of them actually watched the video. So, there are a lot of people who think their job in life is to wake up in the morning and share things with people on social media.
Yeah, that's true.
We all know
they're
this.
curating content. That's amazing.
Most of them are voting for Trump. And and the question is, and that's why I think the app is fantastic. Like nobody's going to do a drive-by app play.
Right.
Every app play is going to count.
I think I'm still a little skeptical because they see this weird behavior where people do. I think you do have to click play or unmute. They're taking the action and then they're.
I meant drive-by app play, as in your own app.
Your own app, private app. Yeah.
I know, but even an app, like I'm saying, I'm seeing the action. I'm seeing the action of play on Facebook, but they're not.
Yeah, how many people still have their Facebook set up to automatically play all the videos as they're scrolling by?
That happens, but the beauty of Facebook, and this is why text over video on mute is great and works really well. The beauty is that they've made autoplay. That's how it happens on Facebook, but it doesn't count unless someone takes an action like unmutes it or clicks play. So, which I think is genius, and it doesn't really get in my way because I just scroll past it. But I don't know if stopping that scroll for more than 3 seconds counts. But I mean, the whole point is that people take actions. It's given some insight into the fact that people still click stuff, but it doesn't mean they listen. I think that there's a large percentage of our numbers that they could be 10-second to 5-minute listens. They're not. You didn't get past your call to action before they bailed.
I think that Facebook forces that, though, because the nature of what Facebook is, you're not going to sit there and listen to an hour. One of my most popular is 5 days a week, an hour and a half, because Facebook encourage you are on there to scroll, to interact, to do a ton of different things. You're not there to sit there and listen to an hour and a half show. You're not going to do that on Facebook because you'll go nuts. So my ADD kicks in, and then 2 minutes later, I want to see what Charlie had for breakfast.
Yeah.
So I think Facebook does not allow that. Mentally.
Well, they do allow it now.
They allow it, but I think your mind doesn't allow it mentally on Facebook.
That I would agree, and that brings up the whole question of how much does it matter if you're promoting a social? Although I do think that regardless of actual listens, it has value. Like you said, for you, it serves as a reminder. Hey, there is an episode out. Go to where you actually listen.
Go listen to it on your player of some sort.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep. Going back to the idea of like, where do people consume or consumption habits? I'm looking at completely different audiences here for completely different podcasts. For the Audacity to Podcast, which has a very tech audience, and my Once Upon a Time podcast, which has a not tech audience. It has a more general audience appeal. Looking at the consumption stats inside of Blueberry, I see that for the Audacity to Podcast, I have, for web browser consumption, a grand total of about 26% of the consumption is through web browsers.
Do you
Desktop.
email about that show?
Yeah,
Okay.
a little bit. It's my show. Did you hear me say that?
Well, no, I'm saying, do you email people about that show?
Oh, do I email? I thought you said, do you know about that show?
No, that part I got. Yeah.
The email that I send for the Audacity to Podcast, I send a regular weekly newsletter, email newsletter that contains a podcasting tip or some advice or something industry related to podcasting. So it's a unique content that they get through the email newsletter. And in that newsletter, below that content, there is a big image, the featured image from the episode. That actually doesn't get all that many clicks. But there are some other funnel things to improve. That's a separate subject. So web browser consumption, 26% for the Audacity to Podcast. For my Once Upon a Time podcast, the web browser consumption, mobile web browser consumption alone is 27.4. If I add in all of the web browser consumption, tablet, mobile, desktop, for that more mainstream targeted podcast, it's closer to 35 or 40% consumption. So that's showing that for that audience, what I should do is on the site, more push them toward subscribe, because this will be easier for you, not because of what it does for me, but because of what it does for them. I know we have listeners who say, oh, I visit the website every week and listen to the newest episode. We got to teach them that there's a better way to do it, and that is through subscribing to something.
Well, and especially in iTunes, people freak out about this because they think something's broken. But when you publish a new episode, it's not going to show up in iTunes for up to 24 hours. However, if your audience subscribes in iTunes or whatever app they're using, they will get instant access to that, even in iTunes. But everybody freaks out. They're like, I just released this episode. It's not in iTunes. And I just want to go, please go subscribe to your own show. Please, please, please subscribe to your own show. Because the minute you do, it shows up. So it's just that iTunes hasn't refreshed your feed or whatever it needs to do to where
in that case, I mean, there is still an odd number of people who listen via like the iTunes software.
Yeah.
I guess that's what the site manager is telling you, but these could be browsing. They found you through search. They just click on it to listen, right? But subscribe, I mean, there's an issue where, again, I think the subscription when it comes to iTunes is more of almost a tool, right? It's a tool to rank. It's a tool to get the content now, as opposed to, hey, I just go to iTunes every week and you're on Wednesdays, not Mondays. You're like, actually, I'm on Mondays, but you don't get it. So I don't know. It's
Daniel, you said 30% of your people for once they tell you, I come to the website every week and I listen, right? Ish.
Well, 40%, looking at the stats.
Okay,
that's
so
what
40%.
I see.
So even better. So 40% of your audience knows Daniel, loves Daniel, visits every week to get the update. They click play, they listen, they consume. And are they doing it wrong?
No, I think they're more dedicated actually than the others, because they have to do several steps to get there.
Yeah, like that's not wrong. I
And
remember I was listening to a podcast once on Stitcher, because I was just doing some tech review of Stitcher functionality. And I'm listening to a podcast about podcasting. And the guy says on the show, anybody who listens to my show on Stitcher is an idiot.
Oh, that was me. No,
And-
it was not me.
Sorry about that.
It was not me.
And I'm like, huh? It was such an out-of-body experience. And I do, you can't really tell, but I do a lot of treadmill stuff. And when I'm on the treadmill, I'm usually watching YouTube on a TV, so it's full screen. And then somebody on YouTube always goes, leave a comment below. And he's pointing at my freaking floor. And I'm wondering, like Daniel, you got these people who come every week and they listen to you talk about once at your website. That's good, right? Why do they need to do it a different way?
Well, and that's what, for one thing, those, I consider them subscribers, even though they're not technically subscribed. This is where the word subscriber really isn't accurate. It's more about loyal listener or loyal audience member. And yeah, I'd rather them do that than not consume our content. But there is the part of me that wants to make it easier for them. It's like, do you move your mouse cursor over to the side of your window to drag the scroll bar, or do you use your scroll wheel? And you see people who do it the hard way, and you want to help them out. You want to show them, hey, there's a better way to do this. This will make your life easier and all of this. And it's a tough balance, I think, of
But
making
is it a hard way? Is it a harder way?
I think so, because it's more active, which there is the engagement aspect of that, which could be great, but it requires more work, and it's easier for them to miss something because they have to take action because of the workflow they've chosen.
I think
Go ahead,
Go
Dave.
ahead, Glenn. Well, I was going to say,
Go ahead, Dave.
it appears harder because there's a learning curve involved. They've got to learn how to subscribe. But I think once they do that, you never know. Maybe they're just not, they're like, hey, you know what? I never check that podcast app thing, but I'm on the website every day and I've got a bookmark for Daniel's site and I like doing it that way. So I think that's why it might appear harder, because you have to walk them through a process. And it's kind of like we were talking earlier. What's the best exercise? The one you do. It doesn't matter if it's treadmill or walking or swimming, or the one you do is the one is best. So Glenn, go ahead. I know you had a point.
I like them to come to the website. I try and point. That's why we do all our pointers back to that episode on the website. And part of the reason is when we have a network, they have a better chance of seeing another show on there that they might like too. So, traffic to the website in our case is a really good thing, because maybe they don't like this episode, but they're there and they go, oh, they got all this other stuff. So I'm going to check something else out while I'm there too. So for a network, we like the traffic to the website for that reason. If they're finding us on iTunes, usually they're finding one show, and they're not necessarily finding all of our shows. So on the website, they have a chance of finding all of our shows. In our own app, they have a chance of finding all of our shows. We have a lot more cross-promotion opportunity that way.
I want to go back to a question that Ray asked earlier. We kind of moved beyond it, but it's a good question. If you're reaching out to a new audience, either in Facebook, you're introducing yourself, you're advertising, anything like that, where do you point them? Do you point them to subscribe in iTunes? Do you point them to a specific episode? Do you point them to your website? What do you guys think?
I would follow the guy at the food courts marketing way, which is the free sample. So send them to the website where there's a big, giant, easy to find play button, and then get them hooked on your content to where they want to come back. And then hopefully right underneath that play button is a button where they can go and subscribe. I think that's what I would do. And plus there's options there again. I'm giving them multiple options. You can listen, you can subscribe, you can also subscribe in the newsletter. So
Paul, you mentioned you working with a client who's doing some Facebook advertising only to iOS people, but you're spending some money to get in front of certain people. Where are you sending them?
To the subscribe page. It opens up the whatever the iTunes link is that brings them right into the app, the podcast app.
So you're having that ad just launch the app.
Yep.
And well, it's iOS, so that makes sense.
Yeah. It's
Daniel?
nice and clean. So the little video says next thing's going to open up is the podcast app, and click subscribe, and it comes to you every week.
The ad says subscribe. Do you think they're confused when they click a link and they all of a sudden this app that they've never used is opening up?
Yeah. We don't believe by any sense of the imagination that we have a subscriber every time somebody clicks on the button.
Right. But any feedback on that? I mean, does the copy say
Yes. The copy says subscribe. That's every one of my clients. If they have one thing in common is they're tired of me hearing it's a message of subscribe over anything else. And it's a message of subscribe solely for the iTunes charting, not necessarily anything else, because these are people who already have an email list. These are people who take their mailing list of 100,000, 150,000 and tell them to subscribe on iTunes. If they were starting first, I'd say get on iTunes and try to get a subscribe to your mail list. So they've already done step one of the list. I'd have them do step two.
So on some level, it's important, or at least it's important to that client that they're subscribing, right?
It's the second most important thing.
Okay. Because you're targeting people who, like you said, have been on. They're probably on the email list, but not subscribed.
Yeah, exactly.
Daniel,
I would think and this could be for different purposes, but I would rather send them to specific content and let the content hook them in. So, and I know there are different funnels and workflows and things to think about in this process, warming people up and retargeting and marketing and all of that kind of stuff you can do with ads. But I think instead of telling them, go to the Audacity to Podcast and subscribe, or click here to subscribe in iTunes, or something, basically asking for that commitment right from the beginning, I'd rather send them to content that will hook them and they'll think, wow, this is great content. And then either inside of that content, or if I have some way to retarget them again, then I say subscribe, because I see the content as really the bigger hook.
I'm curious, Paul, like in that example, when those people click, they open an app and then they press the episode, and then the first things they hear are subscribe to the podcast. I'm curious where everyone's putting their call to action for subscribe. You're like, I just subscribed, dude. Why are you telling me?
We try to get to the content. I think Daniel's dead on here. We try to get to the content as soon as is humanly possible.
Yeah.
None of my clients at this point, at least active clients, ask for iTunes reviews. It's content, and at the end of the content, just like Daniel said, it's, hey, if you want more of this, delivered the second it comes out, here's what you got to do.
Why do you not ask for reviews?
We don't believe it to be important.
Because this is something you hear.
That's a whole nother episode of the round.
I know. I want to rip it. I don't even have the time for that. But I mean, you said it, so it's like, oh, I'm always thinking about this one. Like, did you hear it? And not only do you hear an ask, but people tell you why. They tell you why. It's critical to this show being put in front of people in iTunes. It's critical to this show.
Yeah. I had a client who made it to #1 health, #1 self-help, number 18 in all of iTunes before we started tracking that morning. And an associate of his said, dude, you're never going to make it without reviews.
Nice.
And he showed me the text. I'm like, well, here's the deal. Where is he in iTunes? And we pulled it out, and we don't know because it wasn't top 200.
He probably has like 1,000 reviews.
And, reviews are great. Reviews are awesome for 2 points. Reviews are awesome for social proof.
Right.
They're awesome for social proof. And they're also awesome. The people who take the time to make a review, that's incredible knowledge from your audience, whether good or bad. So there's definite reasons for it. And if there was an automated system that sent you your reviews, that would be fantastic as well. But for charting and for audience reach, see the thing is, I tend to work with people who have an audience, who say, hey, if you want more of me, click this button and I'll come to your phone every week. That's the message. It's not 1,000 people gave me 5 stars. It's, if you want more of this, click the message for more.
But you're saying that in an email, because you already got them on the email. That's where you're saying that.
Yes, very key.
Yeah.
Or we're buying them on Facebook ads, which means we already have them as a like on Facebook. We already have that first connection.
Right.
And
not your first
building an audience.
Yeah.
It might be an entirely different strategy, but for extending an existing audience out to podcast, it's chart because it looks good. And yes, Rob Walsh is correct. We could certainly cheat and make ourselves a Photoshop of all this, but I try not to cheat. But the fact, hey, we made it #1, we made it here, we made it there. Then when we call it, we want to do interviews, we can say, look, as you can see, it was #1 on March 11th. How about getting him on your show? That type of thing. That works well. But in my world, see, the thing is, podcasters, we're a different type. There's the old phrase, when you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail. Okay? That's podcasting. And so as a podcaster, we'll go, well, let's see how good this show is, and we'll see how many reviews there are. But we do that because we're podcasters. That's not what the normal world does. It's not what the horse people do. Nobody ever listened to Glenn because of his reviews.
We've never encouraged it.
Right.
For 9 years.
Yeah.
So the third use of reviews is for those people that are charging you lots of money to get you up the charts, that they can say, looky what I did. So they need that for proof.
And Glenn, why have you never? I mean, because that's uncommon.
I'm the only one here that really doesn't care about iTunes a whole lot. I really never have. I never. Most of our people, again, we're not listening on iTunes. We're listening on Android or our app, or on our players on websites around the internet. So iTunes is just never. I don't know. I never listened to iTunes. I know I'm probably wrong, but
Glenn doesn't know it, but his show can be 3 times as large.
I guess I just.
You're wrong,
but because he's doing terrible. If you didn't know
your sins.
Can I come to you for confession?
Yes.
Here's a way to think about it. You as a podcaster, would you rather have 100 subscribers or 100 reviews and no subscribers?
That's an easy one.
Is that a question?
It's a rhetorical, but I think we all know what the answer would be.
So, I mean, I hope you've sensed my theme throughout this is that really all I want is a length of listen stat from the iOS app. I don't think we're going to get that. It's really, I really would like that because I don't believe the numbers. Let's just be honest.
But the thing is,
yeah.
Here's the question, okay? Why do you want that?
Because what I see on social, what I see on YouTube, the numbers give a false sense that people are actually listening.
So you want to justify your existence as a podcaster?
No, not at all.
What's the end game? Why do you want this stat?
So on YouTube, it's very helpful because you can adjust your content because you can see where people drop off. And in some cases, you can chart, hey, every time I say, all right, you guys, thanks for, boom, they're gone. It's because they know it's the end. So I move that and they're missing content that I want them to hear. So I think I can make my show better that way. But I don't want to, people love having a false sense of their numbers because they like to tell an advertiser, I got 10,000 listens, but guess what? They don't. Now, don't get me wrong. I know there are other ways to do that. I mean, if it converts, it converts. It doesn't really matter.
I did a podcast episode. I won't tell you which one it was because it's still there. Gosh, this won't cut. Well, anyway, at the end of the episode, I said, hey, we're at the end. First person to email me with the keyword gets a $100 Amazon gift card.
Anybody? Can I still do it? What's the
Wow.
It's still there. I'm surprised by that because you always have a couple power listeners.
But the thing is, you could very easily, you could do calls to action. You could do things at different points inside of the podcast to figure out how long people are going.
I know. I know the metric can exist and it's easy to get. So just give it to me.
But why does that matter? Why does other than money to make a better show? Fantastic. Yeah. I am all for podcasters who want to make a better show. The shows need to get better. But is this stopping you from making a better show? It would make it easier. I'll give you that.
I'm just a nerd and I want numbers.
It's insight that we wouldn't have because we're in our little box. We can't see our blind spots. We can't see outside of what our worldview is that well. So for us to see that, it looks like everyone is dropping off whenever I start this segment. So maybe I need to change the segment or maybe I need to drop it. That's something that our audience may never tell us. Hey, I stopped listening. When that happens,
that would definitely be powerful.
And people are, the people who would look at this are looking at their numbers, and I think that they're not necessarily accurate.
Absolutely agreed.
But
you're so inaccurate isn't even funny.
I think Paul.
Oh man, that's a careful box of worms because I am so sick of hearing that the problem with podcasting is measurement. But let's not go.
Well, can I throw in here from a different point of view?
Have you confessed yet, Glenn?
From a professional podcaster point of view, where I make my living off the advertising dollars. I and Dave will tell you this. I discount our numbers because I believe, like you guys, I don't know how accurate they are. What I do count is the feedback from the advertisers. What results are they getting? Are they getting sales? And when I'm hearing from them that, last Christmas we had somebody test us, a retailer, it was their top traffic source. Our show was their top traffic source of all the advertising they did, and they advertise magazines everywhere. So when I get that kind of feedback, and then I get advertisers telling us all the time, we're making sales, they're saying they heard about it on the radio. I don't care what the numbers are, as long as they're happy and they're getting results, means we do have people listening, and not only are they listening, they're taking action.
Except like your resistance to iTunes, it could be 3 times as more. If you know more, do more.
Well, and obviously I'm going to confession about that later. And I'm also going to get my email list back up again. start doing that.
Well, and Glenn isn't saying he doesn't want to be on iTunes. He's just saying he's not focusing on iTunes, right?
Well, I'm on iTunes, obviously,
exactly.
but yeah, I'm just not focusing on it. No.
But are you on TuneIn for the
Amazon
the
Alexa.
7 iPhone
For those
users?
three Windows people.
No, it's the
No.
Amazon Echo.
Alexa.
Oh,
Hey, don't.
Round table. There we go. She's got
again,
it.
that requires a good internet connection to make it happen.
It's 32 kilobits per second mono. You're okay. Hey, so as we get out of here, don't do that, by the way. Thank you, Stitcher, for stopping that. Anyways, different topic. I gave all those call to actions in the beginning, kind of as a joke, but it fit in to subscribe to this show. But when we talk about call to actions, you can place them anywhere. You can see results. That subscribe call to action, I think we hit on this actually. But how many call to actions are you putting in your show, if you can think? And where are you placing that? Just to give insight to other people who are listening and are watching. Daniel, this will be our exit out. Let us know a little bit if we have to, and then let us know where we can find you, and we'll head out of here. Daniel?
I try to space out my calls to action, but really focus them in on a single call to action or a single place to go where they can then take their choice of further actions. That's usually the show notes. So whether it's a sponsor or support the podcast or get a particular link or take a particular action, I send them to either the main domain or the specific URL for the show notes for that episode. And it's a very simple URL because I don't want to overwhelm them with all kinds of different URLs. Do this at /that and this at that /that. But also, I try to keep in mind to not overwhelm them with how many calls to action there are. And I know as podcasters, we have a lot, and especially if you have sponsors, that's extra calls to action. I try to space those out. So maybe there's the donate call to action somewhere in the middle of the episode. There's the subscribe call to action somewhere near the end, or something like that. Spacing it out a little bit more so they're not overwhelmed with, I've just asked you to do 20 things. That the most important thing is the one I leave them with, so that if nothing else, they'll remember that, and that can connect them to the other stuff. And I am Daniel J. Lewis from the audacitytopodcast.com and creator of mypodcastreviews.com.
Which, Paul, that was the joke, by the way, about review sites sending you automatic. Hey,
I'm sorry, what's that link again? It broke up a little bit more. For
Yeah, I
me.
couldn't hear it either.
It was, I'll say it slowly for you so the internet won't hurt it. mypodcastreviews.com.
promo code podcast helper. You get you nothing. Hey, as a subscriber to the Audacity to Podcast, are you going to stop asking me to subscribe?
Oh, I don't think I ever ask you anyway.
Do you not have that? Do you not have subscribe call to action in your?
In fact, I think I said it accidentally in a recent episode, and I edited it out because I realized it's so stupid for me to ask podcasters to subscribe. They'll subscribe if they want to. They know how it works.
Interesting. I like that. All right, Dave.
I was sitting there thinking about this. My call to action usually is at the end of the show, and it's usually go sign up at the School of Podcasting. That's usually what I'm at. You
really think you only have one call to action?
No, that's the other bad thing I was going to point out. I usually go, oh, whatever you do, and then I sprinkle on about 4 other ones, which is horrible. It's really hard to do just one.
I listen every week, and I hear multiple ones in there, Dave.
Yeah, it's
always hard to do. It is hard to do.
To do just one. So I need to do what Daniel's doing and sprinkle them throughout the episode.
Where we find your show, Dave?
Oh, schoolofpodcasting.com.
I want to hear all those call to actions.
Yes.
Go to schoolofpodcasting.com.
Podcasting.com/subscribe.
There you go. He'll teach you. Glenn, thank you so much. Unfortunately, not video. Most people are just listening to this anyways, but we will have you back on because Glenn has incredible insights. If we didn't take time to introduce him well enough here, Glenn is doing very well with his podcast that doesn't reach, that are people that are very hard, has a hard time reaching your typical podcast consumer.
But he's doing it wrong. So
he's doing it all wrong. He's clearly doing it wrong. Everything possible. No review, no email lists, no iTunes. Total failure.
Can I throw a brag thing in here?
Yes.
Quick? We're at 4,982 episodes. We're going to hit 5,000 next week.
Crazy.
Nice.
So I'm so excited about that.
Cross promo, you have to go listen to Glenn's interview on schoolofpodcasting.com. It's /what, Dave?
Schoolofpodcasting.com/Glenn. That's with 2 N's and the number 1.
If you want to figure out how you should be thinking about your podcast, go listen. It's a must listen. Like, it's the one thing that I recommend constantly. Anyways, Glenn, calls to action.
We sprinkle them throughout. We try and weave them into the conversation is what we try and do. We try and weave them into the conversation during the show, and at the end we wrap them all. We have to do sponsors and everything else at the end too. And I only do two things. I send them to the website, and one of the reasons we send them to the website is we remind them every time that we have a search function there. If they're searching for a past guest, if there's somebody they're wondering was on one of the shows, go use the search function there. And then also download our app. It's free and it's easy to use. It's the simplest way to listen to our shows. iOS or Android, just search for Horse Radio Network.
He said that before. All right.
Yeah, 1,000 times.
Thanks, Glenn, so much. Paul.
Pretty much every other show, I'm sending people to a download at the show episode. So episode 101 had a download, episode 102 didn't. So
like a PDF, you mean? Is that what you mean? Download?
A PDF, but that they have to sign up for.
Right.
So 7 things to do about Apple was at the podcastreport.com 101. And what that does, it does 2 things, 2 very, very important things. Number 1, builds my mailing list, which is very good. But number 2, it indicates where my audience is wanting to take the next step. You know, if I do an offer of a free download of the 7 things to think about when you're dealing with Apple, and I get 5,000 downloads and 3 people sign up for the PDF, then I know that my audience doesn't really care about going any further with that topic, and I'm not going to investigate that topic any further. If I have a free download that about a certain topic and 5% of the downloads sign up for this, I know we got ourselves a winner chicken dinner. And so that is one of the ways for me to build my list and really figure out my audience. You know, I've got some pretty loyal fans. I know we all do, you know, who will listen through to the end, and God bless them. But the fact of the matter is I want the ones that really are going to make them take the next step of action. So I try pretty much every episode to do a download of some sort like that. Last episode was an interview with John Lee Dumas. It's required by law that every podcaster must interview John Lee Dumas at least once a month. And so I was fulfilling my obligations to the industry there. That one didn't have it, but I do the download. It's always my website, and it's always the website / the number, not /episode /podcast / whatever / the number. And then I have people subscribe to the show, because once they're there, I don't care how they listen. I just say, hey, if you want more of this, go ahead and subscribe to the show. That seems to do fairly well. Those are the 2 things I do. My belief in calls to action is people think consciously and subconsciously what is paying for the show. So if I listen to the Once Upon a Time podcast and there's a commercial for GoDaddy, in my mind, okay, GoDaddy's paying for the show. Thanks, Daniel. Enjoy the check from GoDaddy. We're done. We walk away. If Daniel delivers the show completely and entirely without any commercial of any sort, now I owe Daniel something. And I think this is really, really important. So, you know, my goal is not to sell low-end stuff. My goal is to sell high-end stuff. If I sell a customer 1 on every 5,000, 10,000 downloads, I'm thrilled. So that's sort of my goal in the process is to leave them going, hey, you know, what am I going to do with Paul next? Definitely going to listen next week. Thanks for the freebie. Thanks for this. Thanks for the newsletter. Try to make the newsletter incredibly informative. I don't give away, you know, Amazon hot tips or anything like that, but I try to make it powerful for them so that we go a year where they're thinking, hey, I like this Paul guy. Maybe I want to do something more with him. But that's the model for this particular show. That's not a universal truth for all podcasts.
Awesome. And where do we find your show?
Thepodcastreport.com.
Very cool. Well, thanks, everyone. I think we had a good conversation.
Where do we find yours? Come on.
Me? Oh, just go to, that's where we're going. Podcastersroundtable.com/guest. If you want to be on the show like Paul, like Glenn, we'll get you on here eventually. Check out podcastersroundtable.com/guest. And you in a couple weeks for 78. If you're watching live, thank you so much. Several of you are. Adam, Emily checked in. You rock, Emily. She's always here, almost always. Dave Jackson's mixing up in the chat. That's appreciated. And of course, Harry Duran from Podcast Junkies.
Harry.
Jason Olivio. Good questions. You know, there's more going on in the chat than I was able to get to, which is just always exciting. And I'm glad to see that now that we are sort of struggling to get our live feet back under us after Google, the Google Plus thing. But we are just fine. And of course, who else is in there? Dave.
Fred Castaneda.
Of course,
Fred.
Fred was there.
Fred!
All right, you guys rock. All right. Podcastersroundtable.com. We will see you next time. Wave goodbye, everybody. And if you're still listening, tweet at Podcast Helper, #StatsMonster. That's for Paul.